At the end of a series that we've called 167. What does that mean? Well, there are 24 hours in a day. There are 7 days in a week. And I've been told that is 168 hours in the week. And so we've just said that for most of us that we spend one of those hours each week worshiping Jesus. And so that's where we get the number 167. And so gave you all bracelets last week. If you're not a bracelet wearer, that's fine. I've been asked probably a dozen times this week, what does the 167 mean? A great opportunity to witness at my work where a lot of people I work with are not believers in Jesus. And so it's so fun to be able to talk about what that looks like. But our desire is that when you think of the 167, you think of, God, how do you want me to live in my 167? How do you want me to live for you during the week? And so I think that's such a good question. When I was in high school, these bracelets came out. Here's where the idea came from. These bracelets came out that simply had 4 letters on them, WWJD. And so when you looked at the idea is that when you look at the bracelet, you would say, what would Jesus do? And they were great. I noticed in high school, it guilted me a ton, because I'm not doing what Jesus would do. Hopefully this is not guilt for you, but it's a way for you to really live this idea out, that we want to live in the 167 for Jesus. And so the first week we talked about what does it look like to live as a living sacrifice, to live our lives as a living sacrifice. Week 2, I armed you with this question. What does it look like to be on the other side of me? Or what is it like to be on the other side of me? A great question. In my office, this question has transformed our office. We're all asking that question and being incredibly honest and vulnerable with one another, and it has transformed the way that we do work, the way that we relate to each other. Our relationships are growing. You would say revival is happening in our little office. It's so much fun. Last week we talked about spiritual gifts, and it's been so fun to hear from you what your gifts are and how you're going to serve both inside and outside of the church. That has been awesome. And so throughout this series, we've really been focusing on Romans chapter 12. So if you would, open up your Bibles to Romans chapter 12. We have a QR code on the screen that will take you to YouVersion. If you have the YouVersion Bible app, you can also search in there if that's not up long enough for you. If you get distracted by what else is happening in the world, you can always just search for Center Church under events, and that will be right there for you. But Romans chapter 12. And so Romans 1 through 11, Paul really is all about Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. This is what Jesus did for us. This is how we're now it's how we're supposed to live for Jesus. And so the first few, we've kind of dove into that. But in chapter 9, he really says, okay, in light of that, this is how you apply it. And so this is what he says. First off, Romans 12:9, he says, let love be genuine. Now, why did he have to say that? Because if you've experienced the same world that I've experienced, a lot of times love is not genuine, right? A lot of times what we experience is people trying to get things from us, or people trying to utilize our skills, people trying to utilize us in a relationship. That was especially true in Rome, where everything was transactional. And so he's saying, let your love be genuine, not transactional. And if we're honest, this is most of us all the time. We don't love genuinely, and we use that word a ton, and really, are we using it in the right context? Like I can say, I love tacos, I love the Broncos, I love running, I love my wife, I love Jesus, and love in all of those is actually different. Like, do I love tacos the same way that I love my wife? It's debatable. No, kidding. I do love tacos, but I love her so much more, right? He says, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with brotherly affection. The idea of family love, love one another as if you would love your family. Most of us, we would be willing to die for our family, saying, hey, when you look at one another, that's how you should love one another. I love what he says next. He says, outdo one another in showing honor. Man, what would that look like in our world if that's the way that Christians lived? Like, what would that look like if in your office, at your work, at school, wherever you are, You're like, hey, it is my job to outdo you in honoring you, in showing you love. Like, that's the way that we're supposed to think of it. I love what he says there. Do not be slothful, that picture, in zeal, but fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Go ahead and underline that phrase there. Seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Remember, he's writing to the church in Rome where Christians were literally being killed for their faith, right? They were being killed. He's saying, bless them. Bless those who persecute you. Bless them and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. What would that look like if churches really lived like that? Like, man, what is Center Church known for? Man, Center Church is known for outdoing one another in love and associating with the lowly. That is a church that will gain a reputation in the community, and a good reputation in the community. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give though to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. That is so counter to everything that we experience in our culture. Everything in our culture says, if your enemy is hungry, if you have an enemy at all, just unfollow them. Like, mute them, ghost them, they're out of your life. He says, hey, if your enemy is thirsty, give him something to drink. If your enemy is hungry, invite him in. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome with evil, but be overcome evil with good. And so what Paul does here is he gives us 13 ways to show love, 13 ways to really live out everything that Jesus taught, everything that Jesus commanded, 13 things, but he really summarizes them in one verse right in the middle. And so he sums it up with this. He says, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. And we could spend a whole series on this passage, but what Paul is saying in all of this, he's saying, seek to practice hospitality or practice hospitality. Well, Paul's saying, in light of everything that you know about Jesus, in light of everything that Jesus did for you, practice hospitality. This is how you are supposed to live. And let me give you some context to that, because Paul's writing to a specific group of people, right? He's writing to Jewish people in Rome. And so these Jewish now Christians living in Rome, they had a context to what all this meant. So hospitality in Rome is very different than what we see hospitality looking like today. When I say hospitality, you probably think of like pineapple infused water at your favorite hotel. Like, that is good hospitality. Or like wet naps at your favorite barbecue wing restaurant. That is hospitality. But hospitality then was radically different. In Rome, you were required as a Roman citizen, if somebody came into your town, you were required to invite them in, to feed them, to give them a shower, for them to take a shower. You don't give them a shower. That's weird. Nope. To offer them a shower, to feed them, to entertain them before you ever ask their name or what they do or where they're from. That's what was required in Rome in hospitality. And so Paul, when he says practice hospitality, he's saying, hey, Christians, you're supposed to look different, and the nation is actually doing it better than you do. I can only think, what if that was required in our country, right? A new law passed tomorrow that anyone who came knocking on your door, you would have to let them in, feed them, right, clothe them, entertain them. What would that? I can imagine just the revolt that would happen. What would we ask? Okay, are you a citizen? Do you speak the language? What do you do? Are you going to hurt me? Right? Like we would ask those specific questions. Then it was just required. For the Israelites reading this in Rome, or the Jewish people reading this in Rome, they knew what this was like. They knew what it was like to be an outsider going to someplace new. Check out what God says in Exodus 23:9. He says, "You shall not oppress a sojourner or a stranger. You know the heart of the sojourner, for you were once sojourners in the land of Egypt." Going back to like chapter 1, right? The first season, God's saying, hey, you know what it's like to be a stranger. You know what it's like to be an outsider. Let's switch it to us. Have you ever felt like an outsider? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong? It might be totally different for each of us, but have you ever felt like an outsider? I know for me, I felt like an outsider for most of my life. If you didn't know, I was born in England. My dad was in the Air Force. My mom lived there. I was born in England. We moved to Thornton, Colorado when I was in first grade. And my first experience, one of my first experiences of Americans is I was first grade, line up to get in school, and I remember getting jumped by a bunch of kids wearing cleats because I had an accent. And so that is my first experience. From all of elementary school, most of middle school, I felt like an outsider. I was the tallest person in my class all the way pretty much through high school. I just shot up right away and I stayed tall. And so I was always just physically different. I was, I had an accent, which I got rid of right away. And so I always struggled to fit in. I remember standing in the lunch line in middle school just sweating because it felt like everyone was looking at me and judging me, and I just felt like an outsider. Even today, I get to hang out with a lot of great leaders. I get to hang out with a lot of great pastors. I get to be in rooms of people that the whole time I think I don't deserve to be in this room. Like these girls are way more talented than I am. They're way more knowledgeable. They're better speakers than I am. Why am I even in this room? And so I just totally feel like an outsider. Like I don't deserve to be there. When others have talked behind my back or done things or said things, like I just felt like an outsider. Life in general, it feels like everyone else is BFFs and then there's just me. And sometimes I get invited to things and other times you don't. It's almost like there's a circle and everyone else is on the inside of the circle and then there's you. Can we put this circle up there? Sometimes it feels like this, right? Like there's this circle of people and everyone else is on the inside. Everyone else knows everyone and they care for each other, and then there's you. And more than that, though, I'd argue that most of us, we have a circle as well. Maybe your circle is large, maybe your circle is small, but all of us have a circle. And so maybe the better question to ask is, who is on the outside of your circle? Who is on the outside of your circle? Everyone else, including you, is clearly on the inside, and then there's that one person who is clearly on the outside. Who is outside your circle? Who are the outsiders around you? And get specific. Who are the outsiders around you? That person who might be just a little bit awkward, that person who might just be a little bit different. Maybe they worship differently. Maybe they're of a different race or maybe a different economic status, or maybe they raise their kids different. Think about your 167 in your neighborhood. Who are the outsiders on your block? That person, when you drive by, it just looks like their lawn is all disheveled and messed up, and you're like, who is that person, right? The kids in the neighborhood think that house is haunted. Like, who is that person in your neighborhood? In your job, right? Who's the person who maybe deserves to be in the conference room but is not in the conference room? They're the outsiders. In your school or in your friend groups, who is the outsider? Who is that person who's maybe going through that transition that they really didn't ask for? Who is that person who's clearly on the outside of the circle? And this is what Paul says to that person. He says, hey, for us, that we need to practice hospitality. He says, you know what it's like to be an outsider. You know what it's like to be on the outside. In response, through your 167, practice hospitality. And so, what does that mean? It means to invite the person on the outside of your circle in. Invite the person on the outside of your circle in. And so notice that there is somebody on the outside of your circle. So many of us, we get running in a direction and we make friends and more friends and friend groups and play groups and all that stuff. And we don't notice those people outside our circle. But who is that person outside your circle? So my encouragement is to invite that person from the outside of your circle in. Invite them into your circle. Engage them. Say hello. I think a smile and a wave and eye contact and genuine questions go a long way. At work, invite them in. That person who doesn't have a voice, invite them in to speak into things. With friends, and notice the person who isn't talking. Invite them in. At school, notice the person who's sitting by themselves. Invite them in. Look for the person in your community who's clearly different than everyone else. Invite them in. Or if you really want to get radical, if you really want radical hospitality, leave your circle and enter theirs. Leave your circle and enter theirs. Go to them. Enter their domain. Go to where they are. When I was looking at this week, these two words are incredibly active. Practice hospitality. That they're so active. It's not a passive thing, but it's an active thing. Christians should actively engage in practicing hospitality. In the New Testament, there's a couple places where it lays out the requirements for elders in a church, overseers of a church. And there's a lot of things there, right? Husband of one wife, not drunkard, like good leader, like all these things. But the one thing that we consistently skip over is this, that they should be leaders in practicing hospitality. That's what this looks like, that it is incredibly active. Christians shouldn't wait for the outsider to come to them, but Christians actively seek the outsider. What does that mean? It means go. Be active about searching for the outsider. Don't wait for them. Go. Center Church is a church that is disciple sending. That doesn't say disciple collecting. It doesn't say disciple gathering. It says disciple sending. That we are to go, be active in practicing hospitality. If you follow Jesus, you take the first step. You take the first step. It's on you to take the initiative. You move towards them. Don't wait for them to ask. Don't wait for them to change. A lot of us are like, hey, I think so-and-so, like, really, like, that person who lives in that house that has the weird bush that's all messed up, like, once they get it together, then, maybe I'll build a relationship. Like, once people get it together, then maybe I'll do something. I love what Neil Cole says here. He says, if you want to win the world to Christ, you're going to have to sit in the smoking section. That is where lost people are found. And if you make them put their cigarette out to hear the message, they will be thinking about only one thing. When can I get another cigarette? Now, that's not putting down anyone who in here partakes in that. What that is saying is that if we want to win the world to Christ, we're going to have to sit in that section. We're going to have to smell like them. We're going to have to get close to them. I love the imagery here that if we're going to really win the world to Christ, we're going to have to start going to places that are uncomfortable to them and not first saying, hey, put that out, do this thing, behave, shower up, but it's going and sitting near them and practicing radical hospitality. Now, in case you thought that this simply means to just smile and wave, and that's what hospitality means. What Paul means here by practicing hospitality is he's saying invite strangers into your home. Invite strangers into your home. And to go even further than that, is he saying invite strangers into your home, not just for a meal, but to live with you. That's what radical hospitality looks like. Now, I don't know about you, but 95% of people I don't want in my home. That's my place. That's where I can walk around in my whitey tighties and not be arrested. Like, that is the one place on the whole world that I am comfortable. And then 99% of people, I don't want to live with me. But Paul's words are radical. And if you are in here and you're not a Jesus follower, these words aren't for you. But if you are a Jesus follower, and that's me, it's about taking Paul's words of radical hospitality seriously. What if, when you walked into the room, you didn't seek out the person with the highest place of honor, but you sought out the lowliest person in the room? When walking into the room, you don't seek out the CEO, but you seek out the janitor. What would that look like? Or that neighbor kid who is constantly riding across everyone's lawns and annoying and doesn't have a great home life. What if you began to radically, unofficially mentor that kid? What would that look like? When I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I mentioned that my elementary school life wasn't great. And so I was, and a couple friends, we were the kids in the neighborhood who did that. We rode through everyone's lawns. We messed up their flowers. Like, we pulled down branches on their trees. We were rebellious. We called ourselves the Wolf Pack, and we howled. Like, it was elementary school, okay? The Wolf Pack was legit. We'd ride our bikes around with the cards on them to sound like motorcycles, and we annoyed everyone. But there was one guy, lived 4 houses down from me. He was older, probably in his 60s, and he invited us over to his house. And he said, "Hey, I want you to treat my lawn like it's your house." And he would come every time we would go over there to play football or mess up his yard or ride bikes. He would come out with lemonade and just sit on the porch and watch us. And all of us who didn't have father figures in our life, that was radical for us. And we didn't even know his name. He just went by Coach, like, "Hey, Coach." And he would come and play basketball with us on these 6-foot rims. And we thought he was like Michael Jordan because he could dunk on a 6-foot rim. It was amazing. That is what I'm talking about. What if we got to know one person outside of our circle and did everything in our power to help them reach their ambitions, reach their goals? What if we did everything we could? We utilized our talents, our gifts, our finances to help them. What would that look like? What if we invited that coworkers outside those conversations into responsibilities, even if it was a threat to our job security? What would that look like? What if we invited them into our homes? Do you know that right now there are anywhere between 400 to 500 children in Colorado seeking adoption? 400 to 500 children in Colorado that are seeking adoption. Most of them are teenagers. More than 5,000 kids in Colorado are currently in foster care, and we know that the need for foster families is huge. What if you invited them in? What if you invited them in? Now, I know you're saying, "Pastor, that's messy. Like, that is really rough. Like, don't you know that foster kids come with a lot of trauma and baggage?" Yeah, I know. But what I also know is that when I came with a lot of baggage and a lot of mess, that Jesus sought after me. Invite the person outside of your circle in, and leave your circle to enter theirs. And so, why would you do any of this? Why would you do any of this? Paul says, in light of everything that you know about Jesus, in light of everything that Jesus did for you, practice hospitality in your 167. In light of everything that you know, practice hospitality in your 167. Where? Every single part of your 167. He's saying, I don't want just one part of you. I don't want just 1 hour a day. I want all of you. Practice hospitality. And what's ironic is that maybe you're feeling this too. And one of the places that people most often feel like outsiders is where? It's church. That people come to church and they feel like outsiders. They come in and people are sometimes unkind and unwelcoming, and they feel like outsiders. They feel cliquey, and people feel weird and messed up and jacked up, like they've done too much stuff. And people don't fit in, and they don't know the lingo, or they don't know the signs, or when to get up or stand up, and they just don't understand. They don't understand the verses or the stories. And that's so backwards, because the one person in all of history, and that's not an overstatement, the one person in all of history who's the best at showing hospitality was Jesus. Jesus made the outsiders insiders. I'm talking about immigrants, fishermen, prostitutes, liars, thieves, poor, the radically different, those who lived outside of the sexual norms, the sick, the broken. Every single time, Jesus made the outsiders insiders. And get this, the people that thought they had it all figured out, the people who thought they were on the inside, who understood all the religious customs and what to say, all the people who thought they had their theology in the right place, Jesus made those insiders outsiders. He says, hey, you are on the outside of the kingdom of God. And when you and I were lost, when you and I were broken, when you and I felt shame, when you and I were outsiders, Jesus made us insiders. When you were so far away from Jesus, when you were so far away from church, Jesus made you an insider. Jesus in Luke tells 3 different parables, and I love these parables. The first parable is a parable of a lost sheep, right? That God will leave the 99 and chase after the one. Then there's this parable of a lost coin. This coin has so much value. So the woman airs out the whole house in search of the one coin. That's what God is saying that Jesus does, that he's consistently seeking after. Then the third story is the parable of the prodigal son, that the son leaves, and then what does the father do when the son starts to come back? He chases after. The picture in all 3 of those parables is that God consistently chases after us. And I don't know about you, but I had to hear the gospel probably 100 times before I responded. Literally 100 times before I believed it. And I didn't want Jesus, but what I realized is that Jesus wanted me. Jesus wanted me. Maybe that's what you need to hear today. That still today, Jesus makes outsiders insiders. And because this is true, because of what Jesus has done in our lives, practice hospitality. Where? In every part of our 167. And this quote, I heard this message a few years ago, and this quote has stuck in my head probably every single day since then. And Andy Stanley says this. He says, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And you may be saying, like, Mitch, I can't rescue 500 kids I can't adopt 500 kids. I can't do this. I can't I can't do all of it, right? There's so many people at work who are outsiders. There's so many people in my life who are outsiders. Andy Stanley says, just do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. So many times we don't do anything because we can't do it for everyone. But what if we did for one what we wish we could do for everyone? I was at a conference called the Passion Conference with a bunch of college students probably 7 years ago. And at this conference, they were telling us about how this trafficking and slavery is a real thing still today. And they were telling stories about these kids who from birth are put into sex trafficking, and they're abused over and over and over again. And how the cause is simply like, we just need more people to seek after these girls. And I remember going back to our hotel room, and I remember thinking, like, Okay, how many people in the room, 70,000 people in the Georgia Dome, how many people did that actually impact? And I started thinking about my kids, right? Started thinking about my kids. And what if that was my kid? What if that was my kid who was in that situation? What if it was my kid who was in foster care? What if it was my kid who was struggling with this? What would, as parents, right, what would you do? I would put up signs all over the place. Like I would get up here and I would talk about it every single day. What would you do? And because we look at this and we look at so many kids in foster care, or so many people who are outsiders, we say, well, is it really, so many people who are poor, like, is it really my job? Well, what if it was your kid? What if it was your kid who was in that situation? Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And so my challenge this week is, my one simple challenge is just to invite one person in. Invite one person in. That person who is on the outside of your life, the person who's on the outside of your circle, invite the one in. This can be done in a million different ways, but this is my challenge to you, is to acknowledge the one person, to bring them in your circle. Invite that person to lunch. Invite that family into your home for a meal. Maybe something much more radical than that. This week, practice hospitality. Invite the one in. Looking back at your life, you never forget the person who invited you in. The person, when you were walking away, they walked toward you. You never forget that person. They invited you in when it meant the most. There are few better ways that we can proclaim God in our 167 than inviting the one in. And so this week, if you want God to move in your life, do you want a purpose? Do you want to be more like Jesus? Do you want him to be every part of your 167? Invite one person in. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pray, and then Michelle's going to come up, and she's going to lead us in a time of prayer. There's going to be people in the front and in the back for you to just, if you need somebody to pray with, and she'll kind of guide us through that here in just a second. Let me pray.